One of the most important concepts of virtue is the idea of military service, the idea that we must, particularly with the militia ideal, that citizen soldiers are essential to the preservation of the republic, to protect its liberty, and that participation in this process helps inculcate virtue in the citizenry. So it's hugely important, and one of the most dramatic and quite remarkable visual representations of this from the Revolutionary era is a remarkable painting by John Trumbull, The Death of General Warren at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Battle of Bunker Hill, of course, one of the early battles in the American Revolution. The British were expecting to dispatch these ragtag bunch of militiamen. Although they eventually do take the hill, they take it at a great cost, and the Americans really vindicate the idea of the militia. And it's generally considered to be, in a certain sense, a victory for both sides. In the most narrow sense, the British take the hill, but the Americans do so much better than anyone would have expected that it's also accounted a great victory for American military forces. Now, looking at this remarkable painting, Trumbull, who is one of the great artists of the Revolutionary era, wants to capture the spirit of the age. And the greatest kind of painting to do that is a history painting. Now, Trumbull, like his predecessor Benjamin West, another great American artist, is instrumental in transforming this genre, history painting. Traditionally, history paintings were thought to be things you could do of classical antiquity or Bible scenes, that nothing in the modern era could possibly live up to the greatness of those two moments. And both of those painters are instrumental in saying, no, we live in remarkable times, and what we are doing today is of tremendous historical import. And so the other thing they do is that they portray them realistically. So for instance, some of the first efforts to break out of the ancient or biblical versions of history paintings sets modern figures but dresses them up in classical garb. What's great about West's paintings of the French and Indian War and now Trumbull's painting of the American Revolution is these are people dressed in the appropriate military garb of their day. And this dramatic image with this canvas, you've got the darkness on one side, the light on the other. It's a dramatic moment. General Warren, one of the heroes of the Revolution, is dying. The pose that he rests in is one of the most famous in all of Western art. It's the Pietà position of Christ at the bottom of the cross, being cradled, of course, in classical, in Western art, it would usually be Mary. Here, it's one of his military associates. So he has made the ultimate sacrifice, and it's both a kind of civic republican emblem of virtue, and it's linked up to a kind of religious tradition of Christian sacrifice. Now, what's really quite remarkable is Trumbull was also a very shrewd businessman. He wanted to produce engravings of this, one of which the Society of Cincinnati has, and which you'll be seeing on the screen. And he thought that, like a good businessman, wouldn't it be great if I could sell it on both sides of the Atlantic? Wouldn't it be great if I could sell it to the English as well as the Americans? And in order to do that, he does something quite remarkable. At the very center of the painting, you'll notice that there's a British officer who's reaching out with his hand to stay the bayonet from delivering the final mortal blow. So this suggests that virtue knows no national bounds, that anyone is capable of displaying this quality of virtue, that even though we are militarily opposed to the British and we are fighting against them, the British people are not our enemy. They are capable of the same kinds of heroic and virtuous activity that we are, a nice universal message, and of course doubles his sales because he can now sell it on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's good business and it's a good moral message. So more power to John Trumbull for recognizing that. Now, it's a dramatic scene. It's the chaos of war. Warren has made the ultimate sacrifice. And what's very interesting, and has drawn the attention of some recent historians, art historians, is what's going on in the margins of the painting. So let me just talk to you about that because it is kind of fascinating. So if you look at the margins of the painting, and if we had the actual painting in front of us, it would be a little bit more dramatic. There's an African-American figure who's sort of hidden by an American soldier. And if you stare really, really hard in the middle of that chaos, there's actually another African-American figure who's sort of a kind of disembodied head. We don't even see his body. What art historians have noted is we know from the social history that there were a number of African Americans serving in the militia who fought courageously that day. And there's speculation that at least one of those African Americans may be responsible for the shot that kills Major Pitcairn, the man who's falling backward and being held by two British officers right behind the officer who is saving Warren from the final blow. Pitcairn leads the attack on Concord, so he is in some ways a villain in American history. And there's at least some speculation that he was killed by one of the African American soldiers, militiamen serving that day, yet there's no sign of that from the painting. And literally, the African Americans are literally marginalized. They literally are placed at the margin of the painting. And again, there's a lot of discussion about why that's the case. One explanation is the actual history as it played out, if you're an artist, is sometimes less persuasive from an artistic point of view than an invented history that conforms to people's expectations. So since the expectation would be that this would mostly be fought by white American militiamen, placing an African American prominently would have maybe drawn too much attention. But of course, sometimes the actual history and the mythic history are not in complete accord. So he makes the decision to, at least with regard to the African American figures, to go with the mythic story, which makes them more marginal than in fact they actually were. So I think the painting is a great teaching tool in that sense, because it both illustrates this idea of virtue, shows us something of the chaos of battle, shows us something about the nature of art and the democratization of art, and shows us how racial attitudes are very subtly encoded in a work of art. And so I think it's a very rich visual source for understanding the Revolutionary era.